Welcome to Sunday Alive, and next week we have a pre-recorded program with Father John Lynch with many questions that people have sent in to us because the studio is closed for the holiday. And the following week, September the 12th, I have an extremely interesting man, Father Ho Lung, H-O-L-U-N-G, founder of the Missionaries of the Poor, founded in Jamaica, an order very much like the Sisters Missionaries of Charity, and he's going to talk about two of their young brothers who were martyred in their work down in Jamaica. Very, very interesting and impressive man. So join us. Now, I also want to mention that in the course of the coming months, I've been talking to some of my advisors, and we're going to start a series of broadcasts on the content of the faith. So many people, particularly in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, keep telling me that they do not know about the contents and the teaching of the Catholic faith. Years ago, if you went to Catholic school back in the 40s and 50s, you knew your stuff. But a lot of people don't. So we're going to go in a very organized way through the Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the commandments, and then the sacraments. And I think you'll find it very interesting. Now, I am always sensitive to our non-Catholic hearers, and I will try to explain that when the differences between some, not very many things, between Catholic teaching and Orthodox teaching, very little, and the Catholic teaching and Protestant thought. I'm very aware that once we start into this, our Jewish audience is going to get lost. Where if you're interested in finding Christianity, listen. But one dear Jewish lady tells me that she always watches our program, and I said, why? And she said, it's the only thing worthwhile on television. She's your WTN. So in the very near future, in September, we're going to start teaching with different speakers, priests, lay people, lay women, lay men, that are going through particular questions. And we're going to begin with the very first statement. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth. What does it mean? Now, our visitor this evening, I'm very interested in, is Dr. Roy Hanu Hart, a medical doctor and a psychiatrist who has done a number of books. I'm going to introduce you particularly one tonight, Faith in a Hurting World. And Dr. Hart is just about my age, and he drives all over the country. This is an amazing man. 50,000 miles a year. And you drove up from Louisiana and driving around. Where are you going next?
Well, I'm off to Kansas.
Kansas.
Yes.
And all by yourself?
Yes.
In the car?
Yes.
And a remarkable man. And as we go, you're going to hear some interesting things. Doctor, you are Jewish.
Correct.
And yet, he goes to Mass every day. Da-da. I would say, on my program, there is no other Jewish person who goes to Mass every day of the world to Mass. Tell them why.
Yes. Well, this morning's Mass was conducted by Father Mark Mary, and his themes were from Sirach and Luke on humility. I was lucky to find it on Channel 69 where I was staying over in Nyack, New York. I've been going to Mass for so many years that I probably have had the experience of Mass 6,000, 7,000 times. And I go to Mass these days, well, for the last 9.5 years, because my wife had a stroke and she can't go to Mass, so I go in her place. And I try to do that every morning. If I miss EWTN in the morning, I can get it later in the day. Sometimes it might be at 11 o'clock at night. I'm on Central Time. I live in Louisiana.
Well, there is, right there, we've got something extremely interesting. And what we're going to be talking about is the experience of faith. And I was looking around for someone to come on our broadcast who is not a Catholic, but who can talk to us as we are Catholics and Protestants would understand the experience of faith. And we were talking that when we're talking about the experience, not the content, but the personal, individual, if I may say, psychological expression of a person in faith, it goes right across. Muslims, Jews, Christians, and probably, I don't know too many Buddhists very well, but Hindus and Buddhists, that when they sit down or kneel down, the experience of believing in God.
Yes, well, I have had an interesting career and an interesting life. Oddly enough, I have been married twice now, both times to Catholics. My first wife died very young, more than 60 years ago. Interestingly, she was Spanish. My present wife is Chinese, who speaks fluent Spanish. So I have this interesting connection with the Spanish world. And the wonderful thing about the Spanish mentality is that they readily take to mysteries. And at the heart of faith is the recognition that God is a mystery. And when I say mystery, I mean mystery with a capital M. It's the wonderful thing about English. We have uppercase and lowercase. You don't find that in Greek and in Hebrew. So there are amazing things you can do with the English language to further your faith. I was explaining earlier to Father about my travail in the mountains of Mexico back in the 1940s, which brought me in contact with Rabbi Jesus. Now, I am not a Messianic Jew. I am a thoroughgoing Jew. And for me, Jesus is Rabbi Jesus, also Jesus of Nazareth. He is not the Christianized Jesus. That is another Jesus. I only deal with Rabbi Jesus. And I encountered Rabbi Jesus in Mexico many, many years ago in a most unusual way. I was dying of typhoid fever, and in my delirium, I encountered him. I was told this when I came out of the delirium because I have no memory of what happened while I was ill. But I had an almost terminal case of typhoid fever. This is back in the 1940s, before there were any antibiotics for it. And I was told that I probably could have died. I still can see the Mexican women dressed in black with their rosaries praying for me. And so that was my treatment, prayer. And when I left, I was in a little village in the north of Mexico. I was impressed by something the local priest said to me. He said, "You are now forever linked to our Jesus." And so it's been. I mentioned to Father that in my delirium, I learned the name that his mother called him. His mother called him Yeshua. You know him as Yeshua, but in the Galilee there was a tendency to slice off that final A. So he was Yeshua, and for all these years I have known Rabbi Jesus as Rabbi Yeshua. And it has had a profound effect on my life. It opened up the whole world of mystery, Jewish mystery as well as Christian mystery. But I stay on my side of the fence. I'm Jewish to the core. I have no wish to change. Perhaps if we have a little time, I can go into what strengthened my faith, perhaps in the next segment.
Yes. Well, Doctor, I think it's very good. We have a couple of minutes with this segment. Let me ask you this. Your own personal interior sense of faith is strong. We're talking here in your book, Faith in a Hurting World. It's worth, even in a world with a lot of people shaky on faith. You do not appear to be shaky in your faith.
I'm pretty secure in my faith, and I recognize only too well that we do live in a hurting world. By the way, that part of the title I really got from Sister Faustina, Saint Faustina. It's an expression she liked to use, and she spoke Polish, and the nearest equivalent was the hurting world.
I notice in your book you're quite familiar with Saint Faustina and the visions that she had had.
I'm quite familiar with any number of Catholic saints.
Yes.
And especially the Spanish saints, such as Saint Teresa de Avila and her protege, Saint John of the Cross, who, by the way, had Jewish antecedents.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Not that far removed, by the way.
No, that's a well-known fact about St. John. Why I'm delighted with this program, because all my life I grew up in a Jewish, Irish, Italian neighborhood. And I grew up always with Jewish people, and I was very good friends with Jewish friends. Even as a boy, fascinated, and we did a lot of things together. And I was heart-sharped when I saw anti-Semitism. I never knew that. When I grew up in Jersey City, Bayonne, I did not know that. And so it's been very fascinating for me to have you on tonight. And I'm hoping that our audience, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, and Jewish, and Muslim, I'll be hearing what this is about. By the way, we also have a number of agnostics write me notes. So we've got them in there too. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. This is our break. In our discussion this evening with Dr. Hanu Hart, we have been talking, he and I, about the importance of faith as an experience. Now, some people don't have a strong experience. Perhaps God doesn't just give it to them. Maybe that will help them the best. But for some of us, and he and I both share that, a very strong experience. I'll be quite honest with you. I could doubt my own existence more easily than I could doubt the existence of God. And when I was 14, I was reading the Confessions of St. Augustine, and I opened his book, and the first paragraph it says, "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." It's a great line. And we were just talking about that, Doctor. So come on, tell us some more about experience. With your books, Journey of Faith, Faith in a Hurting World, The Far Journey, which is a beautiful book, is about the experience of faith.
Yes. One of the ways that I encountered God was through numbers. And for me, there are 5 numbers of heaven. I won't go into them at this time because it gets kind of complicated. But here's the sort of thing that has helped me with my faith. Today is August 29th. The very first time I was on television was August 29, 1973, when I was on the Today Show. And here we are, August 29 this year. This is the second time I'm on television. The significance of August 29 is this. It is the anniversary of my parents' wedding. So August 29 becomes very significant. It's the number, the day, the date. When something like this happens, I feel closer to God. I feel the presence of God. Some people will dismiss all of this as coincidence. Others will say, well, this is a God incident. I use numbers a great deal in my work and in my therapy. It's in all the books. The importance of these sacred numbers. 3 is the number of the spiritual realm. You recognize that with the Trinity. 4 is the number of the physical realm. Ours is a carbon world. Carbon is tetravalent. It has 4 places where other atoms can hook onto it. 7 is the number of completion. 3 plus 4 gives you 7. 3 times 4 gives you 12, which is the cosmic number. And 10 is the mathematician's number, because math is based on 10 to whatever power you have in mind. So numbers figured into the therapy. There were patients that I had who responded to this numerological approach. It's hard to summarize it. One has to read the books and follow these case histories. And when the numbers lead to some sort of a denouement, a conclusion, the patient, who may have been agnostic to begin with, responds very positively and begins to find faith. And by the way, my most successful cases were with Catholics. Once again, they believe in mystery. And you can't find God if you deny that there is mystery in this universe. As we're so bogged down in our physical realm, we fail to appreciate the fact that there is a supranatural world. We're not equipped fully yet to explore it. Maybe generations from now, people will acquire a different set of skills to be able to explore more thoroughly into that realm. But for the present, I have my moments in that supranatural world, and that helps me with my faith.
Now, it's very interesting. You know, many people trained as therapists, as I was also a psychologist, we never went anywhere near this, ever. Never thought of it. I was aware of it. It's called Kabbalism, which is Hebrew and also Muslim and early Christian studies of numbers. And Christians have the three persons of the Trinity, the seven sacraments, the 10 commandments. Those words, those numbers, we kind of just float by. And it's unfamiliar with me. But I was reading that Carl Gustav Jung, the very famous psychologist, in the pantheon there, you have Freud, and then you get Jung. And Jung was certainly very aware of numbers and things there.
Well, it's very interesting that you should bring up Jung. Here I am now at the age of 81, and I think historically we're reaching a point where there aren't too many people left on Earth who have a memory, a personal memory of Carl Jung. I spent an hour with him in Zurich in 1957, and Carl Jung himself introduced me to Jewish numerology.
Was that Jung that introduced you?
Carl Jung, yes. I have a chapter on him in Journey of Faith. And actually, because of the fact that I spent an hour with him, that's one of the reasons I get invited to give talks these days, because people are interested in the man who remembers Carl Jung.
Isn't that fascinating,
Yes.
You know? Because for a while, psychology and psychiatry had become very, very pedestrian. Nobody ever talked about anything but sex, you know, because that was Jung. I mean, that was Freud. And I remember one of our professors at Columbia, rather wryly said in class, wouldn't it be possible that we could examine human behavior from anything other than a sexual approach? And that Freudian 40 years ago was very popular, but is very much kind of gone down. It's fitted into the whole thing. I think we would be very capable and willing, perhaps, that a great many religious and even mystical ideas, supernatural ideas, are coming into therapy and in human thought in the present time. Everybody was afraid of it to death years ago, and I don't see that fear anymore.
Well, when I was doing my specialty training in psychiatry, I was taken to task on more than one occasion for introducing theological elements into the therapy. Most of the therapy that we had to do was Freudian in nature. And Freud was an atheist, and because of that, his followers decided that there should be no reference to anything theological. Fortunately, I had a Jungian supervisor during my residency training days, so I already got into Jungian psychology, plus the fact, of course, I had this intriguing background. I had actually met the great man at one time. In fact, he had even suggested to me that when I finished medical school, I should go to Zurich and do my postgraduate training at his institute. The problem with that, the American Psychiatric Association would not have recognized those years spent there in training, and I would not be certifiable here as a bona fide psychiatrist. Later in his career, during a BBC interview, Jung was asked by his reporter, "Do you believe in God?" And his response is classic. He said, "I don't have to believe, I know."
Yes, that's a great statement. One of the very great statements. I don't believe, I know.
Yes.
And that has profound spiritual meaning. It's really a mystical statement. And Jung had been raised in a Protestant home
Yes.
in Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of had lost it along the way. But that famous statement, and as he got older, he was much, much interested in faith, not just religion as a psychological phenomena, but as faith. The person you mentioned, of course, Freud. But you know, one of Freud's remarks is that religion is the music of life. Not too bad. And Ronald Freud, his son, in an autobiographical pass, says that Freud took Ada and Ronald for walks along the boulevards in Vienna. This is before the Second World War. And they picked wildflowers and put them in front of the statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary along the boulevards, because Austria was very Catholic at that time.
Yes.
So I always tell people, if when you get to heaven, there's a rather depressed-looking psychiatrist sitting over on the corner and trying to figure out why he got there, it's the Blessed Mother who got him in with all those flowers. You know, I never, ever take atheism seriously. Never, never. Question, if you want to call it agnosticism, sure. But atheism is a faith in no God. It's an act of faith in no God.
One of the important influences in my career came after I got away from my professors during my residency training days. And I encountered a psychoanalyst, one of Freud's group, actually, not even known by most psychoanalysts, Herbert Silberer, brilliant young fellow, who liked to interject a spiritual, mystical approach to his work. He did a wonderful analysis of one of Freud's papers, but then a little later on, he switched from a Freudian approach to a purely mystico-spiritual approach. This got him in trouble with his colleagues, and he was expelled from the Vienna group, and shortly after that he committed suicide. But what I acquired from him was a word that I've always used in doing my dream interpretation, which was not Freudian, it was his style. It's called anagogic, and it is a spiritual, religious, theological way of looking at dreams. that has stood me in very good standing in the kind of work that I do.
Now, Doctor, if I may say this to our audience, the word anagogic would not be familiar. Literally, it comes from Greek, go above. Gago is go, ana is above. So it means really transcendent.
Yes.
It goes beyond. And I get very aggravated by religion in this country. It's so flat. It's afraid of the mystical, the mysterious, the divine. And right with all of the different denominations I see, including my own, we want everything, hard, fast, that's it, bang, boom, crash. And what about the mystical? What about the mysterious? What about the saints? I knew a great mystic, Mother Teresa, and she affected immense numbers of people, and in a quiet, mystical way. Well, now we have another break, and we're going to have some calls in, questions. You don't have to ask a question. Say something, but let's hear from you. And don't get me mad tonight. Come right in. And we've got our audience here to help us, too. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. Some thoughts. The question came up on how you could get hold of the books of Dr. Hanu Hart, and now you use the, what do you call it, the I'm not familiar.
Internet.
The what?
Internet.
The friars don't even have television, much less internet. So, what do you dial up on the internet?
Oh, you dial info, I-N-F-O, faith, one word, infofaith.com.
I'm a person of another era. I go back to the Morse code and that type of thing. Now, our first call is from Mary Ann. Mary Ann, where are you from, and what are you going to tell us?
I'm calling from New York City,
Uh-huh.
and I hope you had a nice vacation. I hope you enjoyed yourself and got plenty of rest.
I did.
And my question is, good. My question is for Dr. Hart. I have a number of Jewish friends of varying degrees of being observant, but many of them, if not most, don't believe in an afterlife. And I've always was hoping that Dr. Hart could maybe elaborate. I don't understand not believing in an afterlife, and why does it seem to be prevalent, at least amongst the people that, amongst the friends that I know.
There is a belief in the afterlife. Don't forget, in Jesus' time, the Pharisees believed in two critical concepts. They believed in angels, and they believed in the resurrection. The Sadducees did not. And in many respects, this is wandering a bit, but in many respects, Jesus was almost a Pharisee himself. In one of my books, I refer to him as a Hillelite. He seemed to have taken after Rabbi Hillel the Elder. But getting back to your question, the historical approach is this. There is something we call this world, Olam Hazeh in Hebrew, and then there's another world, the world to come, Olam Haba. And many Jews believe in this approach. It's a little different than what you find in Christianity. The world to come is not accessible immediately following your death. It will come after the resurrection. And Jews have a concept of the resurrection. Most Jews I know do believe in an afterlife. The tendency, however, among Reform Jews, liberal Jews, is not to accept the idea of an afterlife. But that's typical of the whole secular movement that's so widespread in America today. But there is plenty of literature in the Jewish world on an afterlife, a world to come, Olam Haba.
And when you mentioned Jesus as Rabbi Yeshua, there's no question when you read the New Testament that he proclaims very clearly life after death, the judgment, and eternity, for joy for the good and punishment for the bad. It was shortly after the time of Jesus that about in the 2nd century, the idea came along of an interim between heaven and hell, and that was eventually called by Augustine purgatory. That was getting yourself together. And purgatory was not part of hell. It was already, you're moving into the kingdom of heaven, but you haven't got your all of your stuff cleaned up.
Well, the interesting thing is that purgatory is not a term you encounter in Judaism. However, Christianity got the concept of purgatory from the 2nd book of the Maccabees.
Yes.
The problem is this: when the Hebrew Bible was canonized, there were no copies of the books of the Maccabees in Hebrew. They were all in Greek. So the books of the Maccabees never made their way into the Hebrew Bible. But the whole idea of purgatory actually begins in 2nd Maccabee.
It's a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, to be filled, freed from their guilt. It's a beautiful idea, and I'm looking forward very much enthusiastically to purgatory. And I always tell people I'm from Jersey City, and we were really all set for purgatory. That was. If you've never been to Jersey City, you'll know what it's like.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I go to Mass every day for my wife, who had a stroke 9.5 years ago and has been in a nursing home for 9.5 years. The average length of life for a condition like hers would be maybe 3 or 4 years. She has been hanging on in rather good condition for 9.5 years, which may say something about the power of prayer. And at the same time, since we're all sinful creatures, I like to think that all the praying that I do for her may shorten the time she has to spend in purgatory. So I do think about purgatory as a Jew.
Yeah. It's just the word comes from St. Augustine, but not the idea. And it means the cleansing, purgatio, purgation. Yes. We have a call from Alex, who's been waiting very patiently. Alec, where are you from, and what are you going to tell us?
It's good to hear your voice, Father. I'm from outside Buffalo, New York. I called you several weeks ago about the gift of tears.
Oh, yes.
My question to Dr. Hart is this. It's been happening during Mass that I'm literally sobbing, uncontrollably sobbing. It's embarrassing to the people around me. I've been told that it's the gift of tears. My question is this psychological or is it truly a spiritual experience? And I'll just hang up and listen.
Well, it seems to me as though it might be spiritual, and also at the same time there is a physiological element at work here. You might want to discuss this with an eye specialist. They're called ophthalmologists. Look for one in the yellow pages if you don't have one already. Be interesting to see what sort of a dialogue you could set up with your eye doctor. But it's very intriguing.
It also could be an experience of very powerful emotion. Most people, when they have very powerful emotions, joy or sorrow or desire, they may get tears to their eyes. And you may perhaps from your childhood have learned to put tears together with powerful feelings. Men in our society don't easily cry in public. Women do more easily. But in other civilizations, years ago, the old Italian civilization, if you went to the opera, there was lots of lacrimae, tears. We have a call from Lyle. Lyle, where are you from, and what's your question?
Well, I'm from Illinois, Father, and
Yes.
The question I have for the doctor is this. I am a Jewish convert to the Catholic faith, and it is with great joy and tremendous, tremendous love that I have accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I go to Mass every day, and I know the doctor goes to Mass every day. What would it take for him to understand that Jesus Christ is not just his teacher, but his Lord and Savior?
No, I cannot come to that position. For me, Jesus, as I said before, is Rabbi Jesus, Rabbi Yeshua, which is how I have always known him and how I continue to know him. There is no room in Judaism for the idea of a God-man. That is the essence of this argument. So that I am never tempted to become a Messianic Jew. I cannot accept Jesus as a God. It's even hard to try to accept Jesus as the Messiah because Jews still believe that the Messiah is yet to come. In one of my books, I have gone over the brink by referring to Jesus as a prophet. The Jewish community will not appreciate that because the age of prophecy ended 400 years before Jesus with Malachi. And Jews are very strong on that issue. But I consider Jesus to have been a prophet. That's what one of my books is all about, Jesus before Christianity. Not only that, I even mentioned that his cousin, John the Baptist, was a prophet. That's about as far as I can go.
Well, and see, it's important for us to realize there is a difference between Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Christianity and Islam. What people tend to do at the present time is make a salad out of the whole thing. Everybody's trying to be very understandable so they can be everything. That is not a good way to do it. I'm very happy to have on our program for a largely Catholic audience to hear someone respectfully, prayerfully, believingly tell us what it means to be a Jew and not to be a Christian. That's it should be clear. And in the New Testament, in the Gospels, and particularly in St. Paul, he made it very clear. Although he was himself a Jew, a rabbi, when he became a Christian, you jumped over the line. You're something else. And unfortunately, there is in our society what is called religious indifference. And there is a truth. We are all children of God, and we're all seeking to please God and to try to do. But each one must be what they believe and not be sloppy with faith.
I have another thought on this. Scott Hahn, in one of his books, Hail, Holy Queen, makes the point that in ancient Israel, one's name was very, very important. And the name of God became very important. And in one quote, Matthew 28:19, Jesus says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," in the name. So Scott Hahn mentions that you have God with 3 titles in one name. And the name of God is Trinity. In Judaism, getting back to one of the great Kabbalists, Kabbalah is medieval Jewish mysticism, that word again, mystical. In one of his poems, he has a line, "The eternal is one, God's name is one." So the Jewish God's name is one. The Christian God's name is Trinity. But then again, you have 3 titles wrapped in one name. But still there is something of a difference. And never the twain shall meet.
And that's difference. And with Islam as well, it's a difference. You don't have to fight and detest and attack people of different faith. I think that's the most inappropriate thing. And for a Christian, it's most inappropriate. When I was growing up, as I mentioned, I grew up in a neighborhood where Catholics and a few Protestants and many Jews, we got along well. And we never thought of having a fight. But an interesting thing I mentioned before, I always went to Catholic school, and I had the sisters with an old robe habit, and I'm wearing my habit. Sisters will tell you in those days, proverbially, the Jews showed great respect for sisters. And I was the kid, the 8th grade, said to go get the stuff from the store, from the Jewish butcher. And they say, "Now, listen, you, give this to Sister Anthony and tell her it's from Jake." And we never bought anything, I one time asked Sister, I said, you have a lot of Jewish people, I say, "But how do you get along?" They said, "We can't buy anything." They somehow or other, sisters, it made it with priests, okay, but sisters, that was the big thing. We got a call from Karen. Karen, where are you from, and what are you going to do with this? Is probably our last question, so give us a good one.
Hi, Father. Hi, Doctor. I appreciate you taking my call. When you were talking about numbers, and it started me thinking about the mystical and the magical and the difference between the two and being very clear on that, and also the very Christ-centeredness in prayer, certainly for me, is very important. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think it's very important to be clear about that to people who maybe are don't understand that difference between the two and how to pray in the right way. And I do thank you. And I've got to say this, too. You've been married to 2 Catholic wives, and I just wondered, I'm always evangelizing. Did you ever think maybe God's trying to call you into the Catholic Church?
Well, to answer the second question, no. And by the way, I have never made an effort to proselytize, to try to convert anybody to Judaism. But as far as the Jewish numerology goes, for me it has always worked. And that's where something on the order of faith comes into the picture. Magic has always been rejected in Judaism, going all the way back to the time of, King Saul. But Jewish numerology is called gematria, and it is the only part of Kabbalah that I retain. I read the literature. I read it for years and rejected practically all of it except the numerology, which seemed to apply in my life. So that's my story. And it has helped my patients.
But what I think where it would be magic is if you used numbers to do things. You're using numbers as phenomena of making things understandable. Writing 7 on top of the soap box is not going to make more soap. That would be magic. Someday we should do a program on the difference between magic and mystery. This would be a very interesting. Maybe I'll get you back. Doctor, thank you so very much being with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
All the way from way down, driving how many miles?
I don't even count the miles anymore. I just keep driving.
God bless, and we're very grateful. And we'll see you next week. And we have a pre-taped program, and the following, the Father Holong. God bless everybody. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. As always, when we get around to numbers, we need the numbers for EWTN. So if they are magical, they don't work that very well. But we do need your support. And I want to thank you. I'm very grateful that so many of our listeners do support EWTN. As I told you, we don't advertise dog food and things like that. So we'll see you next week.